Jack's heart nearly exploded in his chest as his dog, Cooper, let out another desperate whimper and threw himself against the wall again. The sound of claws scratching against drywall had become constant, but this time it was different, urgent, frantic. Jack shot up from the couch, his half-drunk cup of coffee sloshing onto the worn wooden floor. "Cooper, what is wrong with you?" Jack's voice wavered as he stepped closer. The golden retriever whined, his body trembling as he pawed at the same spot he had been fixated on for nearly 2 days. Jack had assumed it was just another one of his weird dog obsessions. He had checked for mice, for water damage, anything that might be causing this behavior. Nothing. But the way Cooper was acting now, there was something more. Something real. Jack swallowed the lump in his throat, taking a slow breath. He reached out and gently pulled Cooper away. The dog resisted, his muscles tense, his tail stiff. It was like every fiber of his being was screaming at Jack to do something. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. He hadn't believed in ghosts since he was a kid, but right now, he wasn't ruling anything out. All right, buddy. I'll check again," Jack muttered, rubbing his temples. He had already pressed his ear to the wall before, but this time, he gave it another try. He closed his eyes and listened. Silence at first. Then a sound, faint, muffled, but unmistakable. A noise so quiet he almost convinced himself it was his imagination. Almost. Someone was crying. Jack stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. No. That was impossible. His heart pounded against his ribs, his ears straining for another clue, some proof that he hadn't just lost his mind. Cooper barked, his tail wagging anxiously, his eyes locked onto Jack as if urging him to act. And that was all it took. Jack's hands trembled as he grabbed his toolbox from the shelf in the corner of the room. The crowbar felt heavy, solid in his grip. One last deep breath, and he plunged the metal into the drywall, forcing it open with a sickening crack. Dust filled the air. Cooper barked louder, jumping beside him, his nose darting forward. Jack coughed, waving the dust away, then he froze. There, huddled in the tiny space between the walls, was a little girl. Jack's entire body locked up, his mind racing to make sense of what he was seeing. She couldn't have been more than 7, her tangled blonde hair falling over her thin face, her cheeks streaked with dirt. She clutched her knees to her chest, her eyes squeezed shut. For a moment, she didn't move, as if she thought she was still hidden. And then she opened her eyes. Jack fell back onto his heels. The girl blinked at him, her lips trembling. She was real. She was actually real. "Hey," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. "It's okay. You're safe." The girl didn't respond right away. Her small hands trembled, her fingers gripping the hem of her oversized dress. Jack glanced at Cooper, who was sitting quietly now, ears perked up, tail wagging softly. There was no hesitation in the dog's gaze, only gentle reassurance. Cooper had known. He had been trying to help her all along. Jack turned back to the girl. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked, keeping his voice calm, soft. He didn't want to scare her any more than she already was. She hesitated, then, in a whisper so faint he barely heard it, she spoke. "Lily." Jack felt his throat tighten. "Lily. Okay. That's a beautiful name." He swallowed hard. How did you get here?" Lily glanced around nervously, her small chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. She opened her mouth, then shut it again. Jack's stomach twisted. Whoever had put her there, whoever had done this, he had a terrible feeling she wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. "It's okay," he said quickly, raising his hands in reassurance. "You don't have to talk about it right now. You're safe. You're not alone." Lily's eyes flickered to Cooper, who let out a soft whine and crawled closer, resting his head on her knee. She blinked still, then, slowly, she reached out. Her fingers brushed against his fur. And for the first time since Jack had found her, her lips twitched, just the smallest hint of a smile. Jack exhaled, a weight lifting off his chest. They weren't out of the woods yet, not by a long shot. But one thing was certain. Cooper had saved her. And Jack was going to make sure that, no matter what happened next, she stayed safe. The police. He needed to call the police. He needed to get her help. But as he reached for his phone, something in Lily's expression stopped him. Fear. Deep, paralyzing fear. She didn't want the police. She didn't want to be found. And that scared Jack more than anything. He clenched his jaw. "All right, kiddo," he said, keeping his voice steady. "We'll figure this out together." Cooper let out a happy bark, his tail thumping against the floor. Jack gave him a scratch behind the ears. He had no idea what they were up against, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let her down. Jack pulled out his phone but hesitated before dialing. Instead, he checked the time. Late afternoon. They had time to figure things out before making a decision. He needed more information before calling anyone. Was there someone looking for her? Had she escaped something terrible? The questions swirled in his head. "Are you hungry, Lily?" he asked gently. She hesitated before giving a tiny nod. Jack pushed himself up and motioned for her to follow. "Let's get you something to eat, then." He glanced at Cooper. "Come on, boy. You've earned a treat, too." As they walked toward the kitchen, Lily stayed close to Cooper, one hand buried in his fur. Jack's mind was racing. But one thing was clear. Whatever had happened to this little girl, Cooper had known she needed saving. And Jack wasn't going to stop until he found out the full story. Jack moved carefully around the kitchen, pulling out a loaf of bread, peanut butter, and some milk. It wasn't much, but it was something. Lily stood frozen near the doorway. Her small fingers still gripping Cooper's fur like a lifeline. Jack noticed her hesitation. "You can sit if you want," he said gently, motioning toward one of the wooden chairs. "I promise you're safe here." Lily hesitated for a long moment before slowly stepping forward. Cooper stayed at her side, his warm presence grounding her. When she finally climbed onto the chair, she looked so small, so fragile. Jack's chest ached. He placed the plate in front of her. "Here you go. You must be starving." She stared at the sandwich as if unsure of what to do. Then, cautiously, she picked it up and took a small bite. Jack pretended not to notice the way her eyes darted around, her posture tense. She ate like someone who wasn't sure when her next meal would come. Jack sat across from her, watching her closely but making sure not to stare. He took a sip of his coffee, now cold, and tried to figure out how to even begin asking the questions that needed to be asked. "Lily," he started carefully, "do you know how long you've been in there?" She paused mid-bite, eyes flickering to the floor, then gave the smallest shake of her head. "Did someone put you there?" This time, she froze completely, her fingers tightening around the sandwich, her breathing shallow. That was all the answer Jack needed. "Okay," he said quickly, raising his hands. "You don't have to tell me anything right now. I'm just trying to understand so I can help. She relaxed just a little, though her eyes still held that haunted look. Jack felt anger bubbling beneath his concern. Who would do this to a child? Cooper let out a quiet huff, resting his head against Lily's knee. She reached down and absently ran her fingers through his fur, seeking comfort. Jack let a few moments of silence pass before trying again. Do you have family? Someone who might be looking for you? Lily's lips parted, but she said nothing, her gaze unreadable, lost in thought. Jack tried again. I won't tell anyone unless you want me to, all right? But if there's someone who cares about you, I'd like to help get you back to them. She finally spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. No. Jack felt something twist in his chest. No family. No one looking for her. Just a little girl hiding behind a wall. He cleared his throat, leaning back in his chair. All right. Well, you can stay here for now. Lily's eyes snapped to his, startled. I can? Jack nodded. Of course. You're not going back in that wall, and I'm not about to leave you on your own. Something in her expression cracked, and for the first time, she looked less like a scared child and more like someone desperate for safety. Jack made up his mind then and there. Whoever had put her in that wall, whoever had let this happen, would never get another chance. As Lily finished her sandwich, Jack's mind raced. What was the best way to approach this? He couldn't just keep her hidden forever, but she was terrified of the police. He needed a plan. For now, he decided the best thing he could do was make her feel safe. Everything else would come later. You want to see something cool? Jack asked, standing up. Lily tilted her head in curiosity as Jack walked toward the back door. Cooper trotted alongside him, tail wagging. Jack turned the knob and pushed the door open, revealing the backyard. It wasn't much, just a small fenced-in area with some overgrown grass, but it was quiet. Peaceful. Lily hesitated, then slowly followed. The afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the space, making the air feel lighter somehow. Cooper immediately ran to a spot near the fence and started sniffing around, his tail wagging like crazy. Cooper loves this yard, Jack said with a small smile. It's his favorite place to play. Lily watched as the dog pounced on something invisible, rolling onto his back with an excited bark. For the first time since Jack had found her, she let out the tiniest giggle. It was soft, barely there, but Jack heard it. He didn't comment on it, didn't want to scare it away. Instead, he simply stood beside her, letting the moment settle. They had a long way to go, but right now, with the sun shining and Cooper rolling in the grass, it almost felt like they had time. And for now, that was enough. Jack leaned against the porch railing, letting the warm air fill his lungs. He needed to figure out what to do next. He couldn't just keep Lily a secret, but he had to gain her trust before pushing her too hard. Lily, would you like to stay in the guest room tonight? He asked gently. She hesitated before nodding. Jack took that as progress. All right, I'll set it up for you. It's nothing fancy, but it has a nice bed and a window. She followed him inside, glancing around nervously. Jack moved ahead, turning on a lamp and pulling back the blankets on the bed. Here you go. If you need anything, my room is just down the hall. Lily stepped inside slowly, her eyes scanning the space. After a few seconds, she turned to Cooper and whispered, "Will he stay with me?" Jack nodded. "Of course he can." Cooper wagged his tail and trotted into the room, curling up beside the bed. Lily gave him a small, almost grateful smile before sitting on the mattress. Jack lingered in the doorway for a moment. "Good night, Lily." She didn't say anything, but she didn't look afraid anymore. Jack sighed as he walked back to his own room. His mind raced with questions. Who had hurt this little girl? What was she so afraid of? And how could he keep her safe? One thing was clear: Cooper had found her for a reason, and Jack wasn't going to stop until he had answers. Jack barely slept that night. He tossed and turned, his mind tangled in a web of questions. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lily's hollow gaze, the way her tiny fingers trembled when she held Cooper's fur. He had no doubt she had been through something unimaginable. But how much danger was she in? And was she safe here with him? By the time the morning sun crept through the blinds, Jack had made up his mind. He needed answers, but he had to tread carefully. One wrong move could send Lily running, and that was the last thing he wanted. He pulled on a sweatshirt and headed to the kitchen. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the fridge. He peeked into the guest room. Lily was curled up under the blankets, Cooper lying beside her like a guardian. For the first time since he'd found her, she looked peaceful. Jack let her sleep and started making breakfast. He wasn't much of a cook, but scrambled eggs and toast would do. The smell filled the house, and soon he heard tiny footsteps behind him. "Morning," Jack said without turning around. Lily didn't reply. She lingered near the doorway, one hand gripping the hem of her oversized shirt. Cooper trotted past her and flopped down near the kitchen table, stretching out with a satisfied groan. Jack slid a plate across the table. "I made some eggs. Thought you might be hungry." Lily hesitated, then shuffled forward and climbed onto a chair. She picked at the toast first, nibbling the edges like she was testing it. Jack poured himself some coffee and sat across from her. He waited until she had eaten a few bites before speaking. "I was thinking maybe we could go into town today," he said casually. "Get you some clothes, maybe a few things you like." Lily's chewing slowed. She lowered the toast, her shoulders tensing. Jack kept his expression neutral. "We don't have to if you don't want to," he added quickly. "I just figured you might like something other than my old t-shirts." Lily glanced down at the oversized shirt she was wearing. It swallowed her small frame. After a moment, she gave the tiniest nod. Jack took that as a win. "All right then. We'll take it slow." He finished his coffee and stood up. "You can bring Cooper if you want. He likes car rides." At the mention of his name, Cooper perked up, tail thumping against the floor. Lily looked at the dog, then at Jack, then back at Cooper. Finally, she nodded again. By the time they were in Jack's truck, Lily was curled up in the passenger seat, Cooper squished between them. Jack kept the radio on low as they drove into town. He kept glancing at Lily, watching for any sign of panic, but she stayed quiet, her fingers twisting in Cooper's fur. Their first stop was a small thrift store. Jack figured it would be less overwhelming than a big department store. Lily stuck close to his side, her eyes darting around nervously. Jack let her take the lead, giving her space to pick out what she wanted. She lingered in the children's section, her fingers brushing over a faded blue sweater. Jack picked up a few other things, some jeans, a couple of soft-looking shirts, and held them out. "These look good?" Lily hesitated, then nodded. Jack smiled. After paying, they stopped by a small cafe. Jack grabbed a coffee, and Lily got a cup of hot chocolate. She wrapped her hands around it like it was the warmest thing she'd ever felt. Jack took a slow sip of his drink. "You did good today." Lily looked up, surprised. Jack shrugged. I know this isn't easy, but you're doing great. Lily's lips parted slightly, like she wanted to say something, but instead, she just nodded and took another sip of her hot chocolate. Jack let the silence sit between them. He wasn't going to push her. Not yet. But one day, she'd tell him the truth. And when she did, he'd be ready. For now, he'd just make sure she knew she was safe. They sat in the cafe for a while longer. Jack noticed Lily relaxing just a little, her shoulders not as rigid, her eyes no longer darting toward the door every few seconds. It was progress, however small. As they stepped back outside, Jack saw something shift in Lily's expression. She was watching the street, her fingers tightening around her cup. Jack followed her gaze and spotted a man across the road, standing near a parked car. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket. Nothing about him seemed unusual, except for the way Lily had frozen. Jack placed a steady hand on her shoulder. Lily? She flinched, her grip on Cooper's leash tightening. Her breathing turned shallow, and her lips parted as though she wanted to speak, but no words came out. Jack didn't push. He simply stepped in front of her, blocking her from the man's line of sight. Whether the guy was someone she knew or someone she was afraid of, Jack wasn't about to take any chances. Come on, he said gently. Let's go home. Lily didn't hesitate. She turned, walking quickly toward the truck. Jack followed, keeping an eye on the man until they were inside the vehicle. Only then did he let out a slow breath. As they pulled away from town, Jack glanced at Lily again. She was staring out the window, her fingers gripping the fabric of her jeans. Lily, he said softly. If there's something you want to tell me, you can. She didn't respond right away. When she finally turned to him, her eyes were filled with something he hadn't seen before, fear. Real, undeniable fear. He was there, she whispered. Jack felt his grip tighten on the steering wheel. He kept his voice calm. Before where? Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. At the house. When I was in the wall. A chill ran down Jack's spine. He exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay composed. Okay, he said carefully. That means we have to be extra careful now. Lily nodded but didn't say anything else. Cooper whined softly, as if sensing her distress. She reached down, running her fingers through his fur again, grounding herself in the warmth of his presence. Jack drove the rest of the way home in silence, his mind racing. Whoever that man was, he wasn't just a random face in the crowd. And that meant whoever had put Lily in that wall wasn't done looking for her. Jack would make sure they never got the chance. Jack pulled into the driveway and shut off the engine, his mind still racing from what Lily had told him. He turned to her, but she was already reaching for the door handle, her small fingers gripping it tightly. Cooper jumped down first, circling back to her side protectively. Jack exhaled, watching as she hesitated, her gaze sweeping over the familiar safety of the house. Lily, listen to me, Jack said, keeping his voice calm but firm. I don't know who that man is, but if he had something to do with what happened to you, we need to be careful. Do you understand? She nodded, but her eyes wouldn't meet his. Jack got out of the truck and walked around to her side, holding the door open. She stepped down and immediately clung to Coop's fur, her other hand clutching the bag of clothes they'd picked up. Jack locked the truck and led them inside, shutting the door behind them with a deep breath. The house felt safe, but Jack knew that feeling could be deceiving. Whoever had locked Lily in that wall might still be looking for her, and that thought made his stomach knot. He glanced at Lily, who had sunk onto the couch, her small frame nearly disappearing into the cushion. Cooper jumped up beside her, his warm body pressing against her side. Jack ran a hand over his face. He needed a plan. "Lily, I need to know more about him. The man you saw today, was he alone? Did he see you?" Jack asked gently, pulling up a chair and sitting across from her. She hesitated, her fingers curling into Cooper's fur. I don't know if he saw me. I think he was just watching, but he was there before." "I know it." Jack felt his pulse quicken. "Before? Like at the house?" She nodded slowly. "I don't remember everything, but I remember him. His voice, it's deep and cold. He was mad. I don't know why, but he was. I tried not to listen. I tried to be really quiet." Jack swallowed hard, his fists clenching at his sides. Someone had hurt this little girl. Someone had made her afraid to even make a sound. "Okay," he said, keeping his anger in check. "You're safe here, I promise. No one's going to hurt you again." Lily looked up at him then, her eyes searching his for something, maybe reassurance, maybe trust. She didn't speak, but she gave a tiny nod. Jack pushed himself up from the chair. He needed to be smart about this. Calling the police was the obvious choice, but Lily was terrified of being found. If she'd been hidden away for a reason, who was to say that the people looking for her weren't dangerous? Jack had to be sure before making any calls. "All right. We're going to take this one step at a time," he said. "Tonight, I'm going to set up some extra locks on the doors, just in case. Tomorrow, we'll talk more. You don't have to tell me everything right away, but I need to know what I'm up against." Lily gave another tiny nod, but her eyes still held fear. Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Why don't you go change into something comfortable? I'll get some blankets for the couch." Lily hesitated but stood up. She clutched the bag of clothes against her chest and hurried toward the guest room, Cooper trailing closely behind her. Jack exhaled slowly and turned to the door, his mind already working on what he needed to do next. He double-checked the locks and grabbed his toolbox. It wasn't much, but reinforcing the doors and windows would make him feel a little better. As he drilled an extra deadbolt into the back door, his mind kept circling back to the man in the dark jacket. If he had been near Jack's house before, that meant he knew something. Maybe he was looking for Lily? Maybe he was watching. Jack clenched his jaw. If that man came anywhere near his house again, he wouldn't get the chance to hurt her. Jack would make sure of that. By the time he was done, the sun had set. Jack stepped into the living room and found Lily curled up on the couch, wrapped in one of the new sweaters she had picked out. Cooper was curled up on the floor beside her, his head resting near her hand. Her eyes were drooping, exhaustion pulling her under, but she still looked wary. Jack grabbed a blanket from the closet and draped it over her. She stirred slightly but didn't protest. "Sleep, kiddo," he murmured. "You're safe." He turned off the lamp and stepped back, watching as her breathing evened out. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Jack sat down in the armchair across the room, keeping watch. He wasn't going to let anything happen to her. Not tonight. Not ever. The next morning, Jack woke to the sound of soft whispers. He blinked, disoriented, before realizing that Lily was sitting on the floor beside Cooper, murmuring to him as she ran her fingers through his fur. Cooper let out a low whine of contentment, his tail thumping against the carpet. Jack sat up, stretching his stiff muscles. "Morning." Lily turned, startled, but quickly looked away. Morning. Jack glanced at the clock, just past 7. You sleep okay? She gave a small shrug. Cooper stayed with me. Jack smiled. He's good at that. You hungry? Lily hesitated, then nodded. Jack pushed himself up and headed to the kitchen, pulling out some pancake mix and eggs. He figured making something warm and comforting might help ease the tension. As the pancakes cooked, Lily shuffled to the table and sat down. She watched him closely, as if unsure whether to speak. Jack, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack turned, flipping a pancake. Yeah. She fidgeted with the edge of the table. If that man comes back, what will you do? Jack set the spatula down and looked at her seriously. I won't let him near you, Lily. You're safe here. No one's going to hurt you. She swallowed, nodding slowly. Okay. Jack plated the pancakes and set them in front of her. Now, let's eat. We'll figure this out together. Lily picked up her fork, and for the first time since he'd found her, Jack saw a glimmer of something in her expression. Hope. Jack watched as Lily picked at her pancake, her small fingers tapping against the edge of the plate. The weight of her question still lingered in the air, and though she had accepted his answer, he knew she was still afraid. He took a deep breath, deciding to push forward gently. After breakfast, how about we take Cooper out for a walk? Fresh air might help clear our heads. Lily hesitated, looking toward the door. Is it safe? Jack nodded. I'll be right there with you. Cooper too. After a long pause, she nodded. They ate in relative silence, the occasional sound of Cooper's tail thumping against the floor breaking the tension. Jack cleaned up the dishes while Lily lingered near the window, peering outside cautiously. The man in the dark jacket had shaken her more than she was letting on, and Jack knew he had to tread carefully. You ready? He asked, grabbing Cooper's leash. Lily turned from the window and slowly walked toward him. She reached for the leash, her fingers brushing against his. Jack let her take it, watching as she clung to the familiarity of Cooper's presence. They stepped outside together, the crisp morning air filling Jack's lungs. The town was quiet, and the sound of their footsteps on the pavement felt oddly soothing. Lily kept close to Jack's side, her grip on the leash firm as Cooper trotted along beside her. Jack glanced down at her. You doing okay? She nodded, though her shoulders remained tense. As they walked, Jack kept an eye on their surroundings. No sign of the man in the dark jacket. No suspicious cars. But that didn't mean he wasn't out there watching. Jack's jaw tightened. He wouldn't let anyone take Lily from him. They reached a small park on the edge of town, and Jack motioned toward a bench. Let's sit for a bit, give Cooper a break. Lily hesitated but followed his lead. She sat beside him, her hands resting in her lap. Cooper flopped down in front of them, tongue hanging out as he panted happily. I used to come here all the time, Jack said, watching the trees sway in the breeze. It's peaceful. Always helped me think. Lily traced a pattern on her jeans. Did you ever feel scared? Jack turned to her. Yeah. Plenty of times. She looked up at him. What did you do? Jack considered his answer carefully. I reminded myself that I wasn't alone, that there were people and dogs who had my back. Lily's fingers curled into the fabric of her jeans. I don't think I ever had that before. Jack's chest tightened. He wanted to tell her she did now, that she wasn't alone anymore, but he knew words wouldn't be enough. He had to show her. You do now, he said simply. Lily looked down at Cooper, running her fingers through his fur. The dog let out a content sigh, pressing into her touch. They sat there for a while, letting the moment settle. Jack didn't push her to talk, didn't ask any more questions. He just let her be. Eventually, Lily spoke again. Jack. Yeah. Do you think he'll come back? The man? Jack exhaled slowly. I don't know. But if he does, he won't get near you. Lily nodded, her expression unreadable. Jack stood. Come on, let's get home. They walked back in silence, but something had shifted. Lily still looked over her shoulder now and then, but her grip on the leash was less frantic. She was still afraid, but she wasn't alone. And that was something. Jack knew they had a long way to go, but he also knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to let her down. As they reached the house, Jack glanced at the driveway, his stomach twisting. Something felt off. It wasn't anything obvious, no cars parked where they shouldn't be, no broken windows or signs of forced entry, but his gut told him something wasn't right. He placed a hand on Lily's shoulder, stopping her just before they stepped inside. Stay close to me, okay? She nodded, her eyes darting toward the door. Jack turned the knob slowly, pushing the door open. The house was quiet. Too quiet. He motioned for Lily to stay back as he stepped inside, scanning the living room. Nothing seemed out of place, but a strange feeling prickled at the back of his neck. Cooper growled softly, his body tense as he sniffed the air. Jack moved carefully, checking each room one by one. The kitchen was clear. The hallway, empty. But when he reached his bedroom, he froze. His desk drawers were open, papers scattered across the floor. His closet door was ajar, as if someone had been looking for something. Jack's heart pounded. Someone had been here. He turned sharply, moving quickly back to the living room, where Lily stood, her arms wrapped around herself. Did you see anything? Hear anything? She shook her head, her face pale. No. Jack clenched his jaw. Whoever it was hadn't taken anything valuable, at least nothing obvious. But that wasn't the point. Someone had broken in. Someone had gone through his things. And that meant they knew where Lily was. Jack moved to the front door, checking the locks again. Everything was still in place. No forced entry. Whoever had come in had either picked the lock or had another way in. He turned to Lily. We're not staying here tonight. Pack a bag. We're leaving. Lily's eyes widened. Where are we going? Somewhere safe. She hesitated but nodded, hurrying toward her room with Cooper following close behind. Jack grabbed his own bag, stuffing in essentials. His mind raced. He had a few places in mind, friends he trusted, places no one would think to look, but he had to act fast. By the time Lily returned, her bag clutched tightly in her hands. Jack had the truck keys in his grip. Let's go. They stepped outside, and Jack locked the door behind them. As they pulled out of the driveway, he glanced in the rearview mirror, his grip tightening on the wheel. He had a sinking feeling this was only the beginning. Jack kept his eyes on the road as the truck rumbled down the highway, his hands gripping the wheel tighter than necessary. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty stretch ahead. He glanced at Lily in the passenger seat. She was curled up, hugging her backpack, her eyes flickering open and closed. Cooper lay stretched across the back seat, his ears twitching with every bump in the road. We're going to be okay, Jack said, breaking the silence. I have a place we can go. A friend of mine owns a cabin outside of town. No one will find us there. Lily nodded, but she didn't speak. Jack knew she was scared. So was he. Someone had broken into his home, rifled through his belongings. That wasn't just a coincidence. Someone was looking for her. And they weren't giving up easily. Jack adjusted the rearview mirror, checking to see if they were being followed. So far, nothing. Still, he kept the truck at a steady speed, resisting the urge to push the gas pedal to the floor. If someone was watching, he didn't want to make it obvious that he was running. The drive stretched on in tense silence, the sound of the tires humming against the asphalt the only noise in the cab. Jack kept his focus sharp, his mind running through the possibilities. Who had been in his house? And how had they gotten in without breaking anything? Eventually, the city lights disappeared behind them, replaced by dense trees and open road. The cabin wasn't far now. Jack exhaled slowly, trying to calm his nerves. They would be safe there, at least for a little while. Lily shifted beside him, blinking up at him sleepily. How do you know we'll be safe? Jack hesitated. He didn't want to lie to her. Because I won't let anything happen to you. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. Okay. It wasn't much, but it was enough. When they finally pulled off the main road onto a gravel path, Jack's shoulders relaxed slightly. The cabin sat nestled between towering pine trees, its windows dark, the outline barely visible against the night sky. Jack parked the truck and turned off the engine. The night air was crisp, filled with the scent of damp earth and pine. Come on, he said, grabbing his bag from the back. Let's get inside. Lily slid out of the truck, pulling her backpack over her shoulders. Cooper jumped down beside her, his tail wagging slightly as he sniffed the air. Jack led the way up the steps, pulling out a key from his pocket. The cabin wasn't his, but his friend had always told him he was welcome to use it if he ever needed to get away. This definitely counted as getting away. Jack pushed the door open, flipping on the lights. The cabin was small but cozy, with a stone fireplace in the corner and a couch that had seen better days. A wooden table sat in the center of the room, and a small kitchen was tucked into the back. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe. Lily stepped inside cautiously, her eyes scanning the space. No one else is here. Just us, Jack assured her. You can take the bedroom. I'll stay out here. She nodded slowly, setting her backpack down near the couch. Cooper trotted around, sniffing every corner before finally settling near the fireplace. Jack watched Lily as she ran her fingers over the worn fabric of the couch, her face unreadable. Do you think they'll find us? She asked quietly. Jack crouched down to her level. I don't know. But I do know that I won't let them take you. Lily chewed her bottom lip but didn't argue. Jack reached out and ruffled her hair gently. Get some rest, kiddo. We've got a long day ahead of us. She hesitated before nodding, then grabbed her backpack and disappeared into the bedroom. Jack let out a slow breath, rubbing a hand over his face. He moved to the windows, pulling the curtains closed before locking the door behind him. Then he grabbed the rifle from the cabinet above the fireplace, just in case. Jack didn't sleep much that night. He sat by the window, the rifle across his lap, listening to the stillness outside. Cooper lay beside him, ears perked as if sensing Jack's unease. Every little creak in the cabin made his muscles tense, his grip tightening around the gun. Somewhere past midnight, Jack heard soft footsteps. He turned his head slightly, relaxing when he saw Lily standing in the doorway, wrapped in one of the blankets from the bed. Can't sleep, he asked. She shook her head, stepping closer. I keep hearing things. Jack nodded. Me too. But we're safe here. Lily hesitated before sitting down beside him. What if they come anyway? Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. Then we'll be ready. Lily stared at him for a moment, then curled up against the armrest of the couch, resting her head on her folded arms. I wish I could believe that. Jack didn't have an answer for her, so he just sat there, watching the darkness outside, waiting for morning. Jack sat in silence, listening to Lily's slow, steady breathing. She had finally drifted off, curled into the couch with the blanket wrapped tightly around her. He wished he could relax, but the weight of everything sat heavy on his chest. Someone had broken into his house. Someone was after Lily. And he had no idea who it was or how far they were willing to go. Cooper let out a quiet whimper in his sleep, his paws twitching as if he were running in a dream. Jack reached down, scratching behind his ears, grounding himself in the moment. He needed to think clearly. The cabin was safe for now, but how long would that last? The people searching for Lily clearly had resources. His locked house had been broken into without any sign of forced entry. If they had found his home, it was only a matter of time before they found this place too. Jack stood up slowly, stretching his stiff muscles. He moved toward the window, peeking through the curtains into the darkness beyond. The forest was quiet, but that didn't mean they were alone. He checked his watch, almost 3 a.m. He needed rest, but his body wouldn't let him. Instead, he quietly made his way to the kitchen, grabbing a glass of water and splashing his face in the sink. He needed a plan. The next morning, Jack woke to the sound of movement. He had finally dozed off in the armchair, his rifle still resting across his lap. Lily was up, standing by the table, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. Cooper was at her feet, tail wagging gently. Morning, Jack said, pushing himself up. Lily gave him a small nod. Did you sleep? A little, he admitted. How about you? She shrugged. Okay, I guess. Jack poured them both some orange juice and pulled out a box of cereal from the cabinets. We need to talk about what's next, he said, keeping his voice calm. We can't stay here forever. We need to figure out what's going on. Lily looked up at him, hesitation in her eyes. What if we just stay hidden? Jack sighed. I wish it were that easy, kiddo. But hiding only works for so long. Whoever's looking for you, they're not going to stop until they find you. She looked down at her glass, running her fingers along the rim. Then what do we do? Jack thought for a moment. First, I need to figure out who we're dealing with. There's someone I trust who might have answers. An old friend. I'll make a few calls, see what I can find out. In the meantime, we stay alert. No unnecessary risks. Lily swallowed hard, nodding. Jack could see the fear in her eyes, but she was trying to be brave. He had to respect that. After breakfast, Jack stepped outside to make his call. The air was cool, the forest quiet except for the rustling of leaves. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. This is Mike. Mike, it's Jack. I need a favor. There was a brief pause. Jack. It's been a while. You in trouble? Not me. A kid. She's in danger. Someone broke into my house looking for her. I need to know who. Mike let out a low whistle. That's serious. What do you have so far? Not much. Just a feeling that whoever's after her isn't going to stop. I need information. Anything you can dig up. All right, Mike said. Send me what you know, and I'll see what I can find. Might take a few hours. Thanks, Mike. I owe you. You owe me plenty already, Jack. Mike chuckled. I'll call you back when I have something. Stay safe. Jack ended the call and took a deep breath. He had taken the first step. Now, they had to wait. Back inside, Lily sat on the couch, her knees drawn to her chest. She looked up when Jack walked in. Who were you talking to? A friend. He's going to look into things for us. Lily nodded, hugging her knees tighter. What if they find us first? Jack knelt in front of her. Then we fight back. We don't let them win. Lily's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't look convinced, but at least she didn't look as scared. Jack would take that as a small victory. The day passed slowly, filled with tense silences and cautious glances out the window. Jack spent most of the time securing the cabin, reinforcing the doors, and checking the perimeter. Cooper stayed close to Lily, sensing her unease. Every now and then, she would reach down and run her fingers through his fur, finding comfort in his presence. By late afternoon, Jack's phone rang. He answered immediately. Got something for you, Mike said. The girl, Lily, right? She's not just some random kid. She was part of a case a few years back. Went missing under suspicious circumstances. No record of foster placement, no known relatives. And here's the kicker, her disappearance was linked to some shady people. The kind you don't want to mess with. Jack's stomach tightened. What kind of people? Private interests. Wealthy. Powerful. The kind who can make problems disappear. Whatever Lily was part of, it wasn't legal. And now, it looks like someone wants to clean up loose ends. Jack's grip on the phone tightened. Meaning they won't stop until they have her. Exactly, Mike said. You need to be careful. If they broke into your house, they're already close. It's only a matter of time before they find you. Jack exhaled, forcing himself to stay calm. Thanks, Mike. I'll handle it. Be smart, Jack. I mean it. These people don't play fair. Jack hung up and turned to Lily. She was watching him closely, worry evident on her face. They know where I am, don't they? Jack sat down beside her. Not yet. But they will soon. Lily swallowed hard, her hands tightening into fists. Then we have to go. Jack looked at her, surprised by the determination in her voice. Go where? She took a deep breath. I don't know. But if they're looking for me, I don't want to just sit here and wait. I don't want to be afraid anymore. Jack nodded slowly, proud of her courage. All right, kiddo. We'll figure it out together. They didn't have much time, but at least now they had a plan. Jack sat on the edge of the worn couch, rubbing his temples as he tried to come up with the next move. His gut told him they didn't have much time. If the people looking for Lily had found his house, they would eventually find the cabin. Running wasn't a question, it was a necessity. Lily sat across from him, her knees pulled up to her chest. She looked tired, but there was a new resolve in her eyes. Where do we go? She asked quietly. Jack exhaled. We need to stay off the grid for a while. I know a place. An old friend of mine used to own a ranch about 2 states over. It's been abandoned for a couple of years, but it's isolated. We can stay there until I figure out our next step. Lily hesitated before nodding. When do we leave? As soon as possible. Jack stood up and moved toward the window, peeking through the curtains. The woods were still and quiet, but he didn't trust the calm. He turned back to Lily. "Pack whatever you need. We travel light. If we're lucky, we have a few hours before they get here." Lily didn't argue. She grabbed her backpack and quickly stuffed in the few belongings she had. Jack did the same, making sure to take only essentials, his wallet, some food, extra ammunition. Cooper sat near the door, ears perked, sensing the urgency in the air. Jack slung his bag over his shoulder and crouched in front of Lily. "Listen to me. When we leave, we don't stop until we're out of this state. We don't take the main roads, and we stay quiet. If anything feels wrong, you tell me." Lily nodded, her fingers clutching the straps of her backpack. Jack gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze before standing. "Let's go." They slipped out of the cabin into the early morning darkness. Jack guided them through the trees to where he had parked the truck a little further up the trail. He had learned a long time ago never to leave an escape route obvious. As they approached, he scanned the area, ensuring they were alone. He opened the passenger door for Lily and helped her climb in. Cooper jumped into the back seat without hesitation. Jack quickly checked the truck's perimeter before sliding into the driver's seat. He started the engine and pulled onto the dirt road, heading away from the cabin as fast as he dared. They drove in silence for the first hour. Jack kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights behind them. But there was nothing, just endless stretches of trees and dark sky. Lily shifted in her seat. "Do you think they're still looking for us?" Jack kept his eyes on the road. "They won't stop until they find you. But we're not going to make it easy for them." Lily didn't respond. She turned her gaze out the window, watching the trees blur past. Jack wanted to reassure her, but he knew better than to make promises he couldn't keep. Hours passed before they finally crossed the state line. Jack pulled off the main highway and onto a back road leading toward the old ranch. The landscape changed, the trees thinning into open fields and rolling hills. It was quiet. Too quiet. Jack's grip tightened on the wheel as they approached the turnoff. The dirt road leading to the ranch was overgrown, the gate hanging loosely on its hinges. No signs of life. That was good. He pulled up near the house and killed the engine. "Stay in the truck," he told Lily as he stepped out. Cooper whined but stayed put. Jack scanned the area, checking for any signs of disturbance. The house was intact but weathered, the front porch covered in leaves and dirt. He approached cautiously, his hand hovering near his gun. Pushing the door open, Jack stepped inside. Dust coated every surface, but it was clear no one had been here in a long time. He moved through the house, checking each room, each window. Satisfied that they were alone, he returned to the truck and nodded at Lily. "It's safe." She climbed out, pulling her bag with her. Cooper bounded after her, sniffing at the unfamiliar surroundings. Jack locked the truck and led them inside. The ranch house wasn't much, but it would do. Jack set his bag down and turned to Lily. "We'll stay here for a while. No lights at night. We stay low. If we hear anything suspicious, we leave immediately." Lily nodded, dropping onto the old couch. "Okay." Jack rubbed the back of his neck. "You hungry?" She shook her head, exhaustion clear in her expression. Jack didn't push. "Get some rest. I'll keep watch." Lily hesitated before finally lying down, using her backpack as a pillow. Cooper curled up beside her, his tail flicking against the dusty floor. Jack moved to the front window and pulled out his gun. He stared into the dark fields beyond, listening to the wind whisper through the trees. They were safe for now, but Jack knew better than to let his guard down. Someone was still out there, and they weren't finished yet. As the night wore on, Jack fought to stay alert, but exhaustion weighed heavily on him. Every so often, he would hear the sound of an owl or the wind creaking through the trees, making his nerves tighten. Cooper, too, remained on edge, his ears twitching at every noise. Then, sometime near dawn, a distant sound reached Jack's ears, a low hum like an engine. His heart pounded. He turned to look at Lily, still curled up on the couch, breathing softly. He moved quickly but quietly, stepping onto the porch and scanning the horizon. In the distance, just barely visible, a pair of headlights flickered through the trees. Jack gritted his teeth. They had found them. He rushed back inside and shook Lily gently. "Lily, wake up. We have to go. Now." She stirred, her eyes heavy with sleep, but the urgency in Jack's voice snapped her awake. "What's wrong?" "They're here," Jack said. "We don't have much time." Lily bolted upright, fear flashing across her face. Cooper let out a soft growl, sensing the tension in the air. Jack grabbed their bags and tossed one to Lily. "Get to the truck. I'll cover you." Lily didn't argue. She scrambled to her feet, clutching Cooper's leash as they hurried outside. Jack followed, his gun in hand. He could see the vehicle getting closer now, the headlights cutting through the early morning mist. He had hoped they would have more time, but it looked like their fight wasn't over yet. Jack's pulse pounded in his ears as he ushered Lily and Cooper toward the truck, the air thick with tension. The early morning mist wrapped around them like a ghostly veil. He could see the headlights growing brighter with each passing second. Whoever was coming wasn't wasting any time. "Lily, get in," Jack ordered, yanking open the passenger side door. She scrambled inside, pulling Cooper up with her. The dog whined but didn't resist, his ears flattened as if he sensed the danger closing in. Jack slammed the door shut and moved to the driver's seat, shoving the key into the ignition with shaking fingers. The truck roared to life just as the approaching vehicle rounded the last curve of the dirt road. Jack jammed the gearshift into reverse, kicking up dust and gravel as he spun the truck around. The tires skidded slightly on the uneven terrain before gripping, launching them forward. "Hold on," he muttered, gripping the wheel tightly as he pressed down on the accelerator. Lily clutched Cooper to her chest, her eyes wide as she twisted in her seat to watch their pursuers. "Jack, they're speeding up." Jack stole a glance at the rearview mirror. The dark SUV behind them was gaining ground, its high beams cutting through the dawn like twin spears of white light. His stomach twisted. He knew that whoever was in that vehicle wasn't here for a friendly chat. His mind raced through options. The ranch's dirt road fed into a small winding trail that led back to the main highway. If he could make it there, they had a chance to blend in with traffic. But it was a gamble. If the SUV had backup waiting ahead, they'd be driving straight into a trap. Jack made a split-second decision. He veered sharply to the right, taking a detour through the thick trees lining the property. The truck bounced violently over uneven terrain, branches scraping against the windows as they tore through the underbrush. Lily let out a small cry as she was thrown against the seatbelt. "Jack, where are we going?" "Away," he gritted out. "Hang on." The SUV was still behind them, though it struggled to maneuver through the dense forest. Jack knew these woods better than they did, he was counting on that advantage. He gripped the wheel and forced the truck through a narrow gap between two thick tree trunks, then veered sharply left. A loud crack sounded as something slammed into the side of the truck. Jack cursed under his breath, his grip tightening as he forced the vehicle forward. The SUV had clipped them but hadn't managed to push them off course. He needed to lose them, fast. Up ahead, a shallow creek cut through the land. If he could make it across, the thick trees beyond would give them more cover. Jack gunned the engine, urging the truck forward. "We're going to jump it," he warned. Lily gasped. "Jump what?" Before she could argue, the truck lurched over the small ravine, its tires slamming onto the opposite bank with a bone-rattling jolt. The undercarriage scraped against the rocks, but they made it across. Jack's eyes flicked back to the mirror. The SUV hesitated at the edge of the creek, its driver seemingly debating whether to risk following. Jack didn't wait to find out. He floored the gas pedal, tearing deeper into the forest until the trees swallowed them whole. For several tense minutes, he drove in near silence, the only sounds the truck's engine and the frantic beating of his own heart. Finally, after winding through miles of dense woodland, he spotted a narrow service road up ahead. He took the turn, slowing just enough to avoid raising suspicion. Only when he was sure they weren't being followed did he let out a slow breath. His hands were trembling against the wheel. Lily was still clutching Cooper, her face pale. "Did we lose them?" Jack nodded, though he didn't loosen his grip. For now. A heavy silence settled between them. They both knew this wasn't over. "We can't stay here," Lily whispered. "They'll keep coming." Jack clenched his jaw. She was right. They had to keep moving. He glanced at the road ahead, his mind already forming a new plan. "We'll find another safe house, somewhere they won't expect. But we need supplies first." Lily didn't argue. She simply nodded, determination flashing behind the fear in her eyes. Jack turned the truck onto a hidden back road, driving deeper into the unknown. They weren't safe yet. But as long as they stayed ahead of the people chasing them, they still had a fighting chance. As the sun rose higher, Jack pulled into a small gas station on the outskirts of an unfamiliar town. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions. He turned to Lily. "Stay in the truck. Lock the doors. If anything happens, you know what to do." Lily swallowed hard but nodded. Cooper sat up, watching Jack as he stepped out. Jack moved quickly, filling the tank before heading inside. He grabbed bottled water, protein bars, and a map, paying in cash. He kept his head down and avoided unnecessary conversation. As he stepped back outside, his heart rate spiked. A black sedan was parked near the entrance. The driver's eyes locked onto him. Jack didn't hesitate. He strode to the truck, climbed in, and started the engine. "Hold on," he warned. Lily barely had time to react before Jack peeled out of the lot. The sedan pulled out right after them. "They found us again," Lily whispered, gripping the seat. Jack clenched his jaw, his hands tightening on the wheel. "Then we make sure they don't catch us." He accelerated onto the highway, weaving between cars. The sedan matched his movements, staying right on their tail. Whoever these people were, they were relentless. Jack had one last option, an old dirt path off the road that led through an abandoned quarry. It was risky, but if he could lose them in the maze of rock and dust, they might get a chance to disappear for good. Making a sharp turn, Jack sent the truck barreling down the dirt path, the cloud of dust swallowing them whole. The sedan followed. Jack's mind raced. He had to end this chase now. Jack gritted his teeth and pressed the gas pedal to the floor. The truck bounced over the uneven dirt path, the tires kicking up dust that thickened into a blinding cloud. The sedan behind them was still there, but its driver was struggling to maintain control over the rough terrain. Lily clutched Cooper tightly, her knuckles white. "Jack, what do we do?" "We lose them," he said through clenched teeth. Up ahead, the path split into two narrow roads. Jack knew taking the wrong one could trap them. His mind raced. He'd been in situations like this before, outnumbered, outmatched, but never with a kid in tow. He made a sharp left, cutting down the more overgrown of the two paths. Low branches scraped against the truck, but he didn't slow down. The sedan swerved to follow, its tires skidding dangerously close to the loose edge of the gravel road. Jack spotted an old wooden bridge up ahead. It was narrow, barely wide enough for his truck, and he had no idea if it could hold their weight, but he had no choice. "Hold on," he barked. Lily squeezed her eyes shut as Jack gunned the engine and barreled onto the bridge. The wooden planks groaned under them, but the truck made it across. Jack didn't look back until they reached the other side. The sedan's driver hesitated for half a second, then made the mistake of following. The bridge wasn't built for that much weight. The moment the sedan's front tires hit the center, the structure gave way. A splintering crack echoed through the trees as the car plunged into the rocky ravine below. Lily let out a shaky breath. "Did they?" "They're not following us anymore," Jack answered, not slowing down. "But we can't stay here." His hands were tight on the wheel as he steered them onto another winding road. The dust settled behind them, but Jack knew better than to think they were safe. Whoever these people were, they had resources. They wouldn't give up that easily. They needed to disappear completely. Jack drove for another hour, taking random turns, switching onto smaller roads whenever possible. When he was sure no one was following, he finally pulled into a small, nearly abandoned town. Most of the buildings looked like they hadn't been used in years, but that was exactly what they needed. He parked behind a rundown gas station and turned to Lily. "We lay low here for a while. No lights, no sounds. We stay inside." Lily nodded, her face still pale from the chase. She reached for Cooper, hugging him tightly as if grounding herself. Jack stepped out, checking their surroundings before motioning for her to follow. Inside the gas station, the air was stale. Shelves were empty except for dust-covered cans, and a faded, closed sign hung from the door. It was perfect. Jack found an old storage room in the back. "We'll rest here." Lily curled up against the wall, Cooper lying beside her protectively. Jack sat by the door, his gun resting on his knee. He didn't know how much time they had before their next move, but he did know one thing: he wasn't letting anyone take Lily. Not now. Not ever. As the hours stretched on, the silence in the abandoned town weighed heavily on them. Jack forced himself to stay alert, listening for any sound that might signal danger. The last thing they needed was another surprise attack. Lily, exhausted from the chase, eventually dozed off, her head resting against Cooper's fur. Jack watched her for a moment, his grip tightening around the handle of his gun. She had been through so much. She deserved better than this constant fear. A sudden creak outside made Jack freeze. His muscles tensed as he strained to listen. Another sound followed, a slow, deliberate footstep against the wooden floorboards of the gas station's front porch. Jack moved quickly and quietly, pressing himself against the wall near the doorway. He could hear someone breathing just outside. He took a deep breath, then yanked the door open, his gun raised. A man stood there, his hands up in surrender. He was older, maybe in his late 50s, with a grizzled beard and weary eyes. He didn't look like one of the men chasing them, but Jack didn't lower his gun. "Who are you?" Jack demanded. The man hesitated. "Name's Henry," he said, his voice rough. "Saw your truck. Thought you might need some help." Jack narrowed his eyes. "Help with what?" Henry gestured toward the empty town. "You ain't the first people to come through here looking for a place to hide. Folks like us gotta stick together." Jack didn't trust him, but he also didn't have many options. He lowered his gun slightly but kept his finger on the trigger. "We're just passing through." Henry nodded. "Figured as much. But if you're running from someone, you might want to know they've been sniffing around." Jack's stomach dropped. "Who?" "Couple of men in suits. Fancy car. They came through here an hour ago, asking questions. Didn't like my answers, so they left. But they'll be back." Jack clenched his jaw. "We need to go." Henry scratched his chin. "Got a place a few miles out. Ain't much, but it's off the grid. Safe. You're welcome to use it." Jack studied him carefully. Henry didn't seem like the type to set them up, but trust was a dangerous thing these days. Lily stirred behind him, rubbing her eyes. "Jack. What's going on?" Jack glanced at her, then back at Henry. "We'll follow you. But if this is a trap..." Henry held up a hand. "Ain't a trap, son. Just an old man trying to do right." Jack hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Lead the way." They gathered their things quickly, Lily clutching Cooper as they followed Henry to his truck. Jack got into their own vehicle, keeping a careful distance as they drove into the wilderness. Jack didn't know if he was making the right call. But he did know one thing: staying put wasn't an option. And whatever waited for them at Henry's place, it had to be safe. Safer than the alternative. Jack followed Henry's truck down a winding dirt road deep into the woods. The further they went, the thicker the trees became, swallowing the narrow path in shadows. Jack kept one hand on the wheel and the other on his gun, just in case. He didn't trust easily, and after everything that had happened, he wasn't about to start now. Lily sat in silence beside him, her hands clenched in her lap. Cooper was curled up at her feet, his ears twitching as he dozed lightly. The exhaustion was catching up with all of them. After what felt like an eternity, Henry's truck came to a stop in front of a small, weathered cabin. It was barely visible among the trees, its wooden structure blending into the surroundings. Jack pulled up behind him and killed the engine. The only sound was the ticking of the truck cooling down. Henry stepped out first, stretching his back. "Ain't much, but it'll do. You won't find it on any maps, and no one comes out here unless they know what they're looking for." Jack scanned the area. It was secluded, all right, the kind of place that could buy them time. Lily hesitated before opening her door. She stuck close to Jack as they approached the cabin, her fingers clutching the hem of her jacket. Henry noticed and gave a small nod. "No one's going to hurt you here, kid. You got my word?" Jack pushed the door open first, checking inside before letting Lily step through. The inside of the cabin was as simple as the outside, one large room with an old wood stove, a rickety table, and a cot against the far wall. It smelled of pine and dust, untouched for years. "Water runs off a well," Henry said, dropping his keys onto the table. "No electricity, but there's enough firewood to keep warm. Should be safe enough until you figure out your next move." Jack turned to him. "Why are you helping us?" Henry sighed and sat down on one of the chairs. Had a daughter once. She got mixed up with the wrong people. I couldn't save her. Guess this is my way of making up for it. Jack studied him for a long moment. He had seen enough men like Henry to know he wasn't lying. Thank you. Henry waved him off. Don't thank me yet. Those men in suits, they'll be back, looking. You need to be ready. Lily sat on the cot, silent. Jack walked over, kneeling in front of her. We'll be okay here for now. She nodded but didn't meet his eyes. They'll never stop looking, will they? Jack hesitated before answering. No, but I won't let them find you. Cooper nudged Lily's hand, sensing her unease. She wrapped her arms around the dog, burying her face in his fur. Jack knew she needed more than promises. She needed action. I need to make a call, Jack said, standing. Henry, you got a way to reach someone without it being traced? Henry rubbed his jaw, then nodded. There's an old radio out back. Not much, but it'll do the job. Jack followed him outside, stepping into the crisp evening air. Henry led him to a small shed where an old shortwave radio sat, covered in dust. Jack adjusted the dials until he found the frequency he was looking for. Mike, you there? A crackle, then a voice. Jack. Where the hell have you been? I've been looking for you. We ran into trouble. I need intel. The people after Lily, they're not just some private security team, are they? Mike hesitated. No. They're worse. The girl is valuable to them, Jack. I dug deeper, and what I found isn't good. Whoever she was taken from, they're powerful. Government level. And they're not going to stop until they have her back. Jack clenched his fist. There has to be a way out. There might be, Mike said, but it's risky. You need to disappear completely. Change identities. Leave the country if you have to. It's the only way to keep her safe. Jack's stomach twisted. He had spent years on the run before, but this was different. He wasn't just protecting himself. I'll figure something out, he said. Keep digging. Let me know if you find anything. Will do. And Jack, be careful. These people don't leave loose ends. Jack ended the call and turned back to the cabin. Lily was still curled up with Cooper, Henry watching over her like a silent guardian. Jack knew what had to be done. They couldn't just keep running. They had to disappear for good. As the fire crackled in the stove that night, Jack sat beside Lily, his voice low. We're going to leave. Not just this place, everything. New names, new lives. We'll go somewhere they'll never find us. But it has to be your choice. Lily looked at him, fear and hope warring in her eyes. You'll stay with me? Jack took her hand, squeezing it gently. Always. She swallowed hard, then nodded. Okay. Jack glanced at Henry. You know a way out of the country? Henry smirked. I know a few. And with that, the plan was set. They would vanish, slipping through the cracks before anyone could catch them. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be safe. But for Lily, it was the only way. The next morning, Henry led them to an old airstrip hidden in the woods. A single propeller plane sat waiting, its pilot, a friend of Henry's, prepping it for takeoff. Jack loaded their few belongings, helping Lily into the cabin. She held Cooper close, her fingers trembling slightly. Henry clapped Jack on the shoulder. You take care of her. I will. With one last nod, Jack climbed aboard. The engine roared to life, and as the plane lifted off, The world below grew smaller. They were leaving behind everything, Jack's old life, their past, their fear. Lily turned to Jack as the clouds swallowed them. "Where are we going?" Jack smiled faintly. "Somewhere safe. Somewhere new." For the first time in what felt like forever, Lily exhaled and closed her eyes. She was safe. She was free. And no matter what came next, Jack would make sure she stayed that way.